Hi everyone, it's Lauren and these are my reviews for all of the books that I read in the first part of June. The first book that I read was Girls Will Be Girls by Emma O'Toole, which is one of my favourite books that I have read this year so far. Emma O'Toole has a PhD in performance and her main argument in this book is that gender, or the aspects of gender, are a performance and they are separate from your biological sex. So the clothes we wear, whether we wear makeup or not, how short our hair is, how you hold yourself, how you walk, what you say, how you say, all of these things are a performance to align yourself with a certain gender. And they're all things that have been taught to you by society since you've been a child. So for example, when you're a teenager, maybe you wanted to align yourself to a certain group of people, like you wanted to dress a certain way. And then as you walk down the street, people would think, that person is a punk rocker, and you align yourself to a group and you find yourself an identity. And her argument is that gender is that. There's a whole chapter in here on body hair, which I thought was really interesting because she says that women's body hair has become disgusting, whereas men's body hair is just completely fine and completely normal. And she talks about the journey that we've come on to get to this situation now, that for a woman to walk around with visible body hair is a really difficult thing to do. That's quite a radical statement for you to not shave under your arms and wear a top where people can see that. And it's become not a choice, it's become you have to do that. And she did an experiment where for 2 years she didn't shave, and she talks about how uncomfortable she felt the whole way through. And it's just a really interesting point and really illustrates the fact that you think you're choosing to make yourself look a certain way, when really the alternative is really difficult to deal with. And there's a whole chapter in here on boobs and how women's chests are viewed differently to men's chests. And naturally, if you're talking about gender being a construct, she does talk about both gender and sexuality being on spectrums. She doesn't stick to the gender binary idea. And I just really loved the book. I thought she argued really coherently and persuasively. And by the end of it, when she talks about just taking down gender and just playing with gender and doing different things, I was just right there with her, and I just thought, yes, this is fantastic. The next book that I finished in June was Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. I'm gonna upset some people now, I think. This is about a woman called Louisa who loses her job and then finds another job caring for a guy called Will, who is a quadriplegic after a motorbike accident. And she's not doing any personal care, but she's there to see him, talk to him, hang out with him during the day, and they develop a friendship. Now, there has been a lot said about this book and its depiction of the disabled, and I would agree that it is ableist to the extent that this is written from the perspective of an able-bodied person, and the way it views disability is that there really isn't anything left to live for if you are paralysed from the shoulders down. And it's not a great view of a quadriplegic life, and it's a pretty patronising and not very supportive view of that life. It's a very two-dimensional view of what it might be like to be in a wheelchair. However, I think the reason for that is that every character in this book is two-dimensional, and none of them are fully realised. That I have no surprises that the depiction of someone in a wheelchair is done badly, because I feel like the depiction of all people is bad. That said, I didn't hate this book while I was reading it. I did find it boring. I didn't connect with any of the characters. I find it very surprising when people say that they were really emotionally affected by this book, because I can't find a single personality in that book that my emotions can latch onto. And I'm really disappointed, because I wanted to enjoy this book, but it just has nothing to recommend itself. I then finished a little book of short stories, which was Some by David Eagleman, which is 40 Tales of the Afterlife. And what this is 40 very, very short stories, a page or two each, and each of them imagines a different afterlife, either a different meaning of life, or of different what the afterlife might be, or whether there's an afterlife or not, or where people come from. And it's really interesting. There is some humour in here as well. And I was worried that it might be repetitive with each short story being about some form of afterlife. But actually, the overall effect is that it made me really think about the meaning of life in general, and it's just different ponderings on where we might come from, what life might mean, whether immortality is something to strive for. I mean, there's lots of different tales in here where immortality happens and things go terribly wrong, different ideas on who or what God is, and another recurring theme is God maybe worrying about his or her creation and losing control of it. One of the short stories that I really liked in here was that when you go to heaven, Mary Shelley is sitting on a throne ruling heaven because God's favourite book is Frankenstein. Because when God read Frankenstein, he thought, oh, finally someone understands how lonely it is to be the creator and create something which then goes amok. And so he just reads Frankenstein over and over again and leaves Mary Shelley in charge, which I thought was quite funny. And sometimes it's just a nice reminder to think about the big important things and the meaning of life sometimes, and be reminded of your own mortality. So I really enjoyed this. And finally, I've just finished a book of flash fiction, which was My Mother Was an Upright Piano by Tanya Hirschman, and this is 56, I think, short fictions, flash fictions. And this is part of my easing myself into poetry idea that I had. And to me, although these are fictions, they really do feel much more like poems because they're not really about plot. What I get from each story is an emotion. And so to me, I link that more with poetry. And you can see they're not very long at all. They are like long poems, just in prose form, really. And they're very abstract. It's very difficult for me to explain what this collection is like. But the overall takeaway that I had from it is that it's like you're halfway through a dream when you're reading them, and each fiction is like a single emotion where everything else in life has been muted and the volume on this emotion has just been turned up, or this situation. And overall, when you're reading it, it feels like someone grasping at reality or grasping at human connections and dealing with their own emotions and trying to make sense of it. And within this kind of abstract emotional feeling is this framework of British society, which I thought was really funny. So, for example, there's a very little fiction where a woman's saying to her husband, can you see those dogs out in the garden? There's 48 dogs. And the husband's like, I can't see them. Come inside, I'll make you a cup of tea. And it's that sort of thing, the rituals of making cups of tea and going to the seaside, and it's a very British domestic framework that a lot of these have, which I thought was really nice, and in opposition to some of the more fantastical things that are going on in here. So I'm really pleased that I had a go at this. This was my first introduction to flash fiction, and it was a really different experience. It was really nice commuting reading this, actually, because you didn't have to get too invested in a plot, but it's almost like her thoughts and feelings just washed over you. So I got more of an experience from it than I expected to. So let me know if you've read any of these. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I'll be back again in a couple of weeks' time with reviews of what I read in the second part of June. If you're new, you can subscribe for more videos by clicking the little red button underneath the left-hand corner of this video, just down there, and I will see you next time. Bye! Just a beautiful, beautiful, heartbreaking story. I think because it's told with such honesty from that main character's perspective, you just empathise with her so much.